So on behalf of the Kenya team, I'll present the country diagnostic report for Kenya. Okay, you've had a lot this morning already outlined about the major features and aspects of the country. 44 million people, and as you've heard, we are really growing very, very fast and will double within the next 20 to 25 years. 42 ethnic groups, highly diverse in terms of culture and practices. 80% of the country is basically semi-arid to arid, and we have a poverty rate of 45%. So in this context, we're looking at 4 significant but quite uncertain developments which underpin the issues relating to water security, particularly for the 17 million plus poor people within the country. One of those is the impacts of decentralization, about which we have heard. And decentralization has basically brought governance and services closer to the people. And there are opportunities to develop new frameworks and new institutions for managing people and the environment through the decentralization network. The other issue, again, is the resilience to climate shocks. We've heard again that we have, of course, a lot of climate variability in Eastern Africa. We experience a lot of droughts and floods. And what does this really mean in terms of securing water for the future? Kenya is also quite a vibrant nation, and we are also quite entrepreneurial. And in terms of the mobile ecosystems, we have led the world with our mobile pay system, the M-Pesa, the famous M-Pesa. And we have the opportunity here then to harness these mobile ecosystems in quite innovative ways to address issues related to water security. We also have to deal with the big challenge of reducing inequalities, creating wealth for the poor, maintaining wealth or enhancing those who are rich, and reducing the gap. So this is the context within which we will be driving forward with the REACH project. So decentralization came about as a consequence of the new constitution, which we promulgated in 2010, ended up with the setting up of 47 county governments, each of which do have within their structures affiliated water ministries, and as we heard, they cooperate with the national ministries of water. If we look at a little bit at the history, and we're looking at particularly in the fragile lands, in the northern part of the country and the far eastern parts of the country, there's been a lot of issues in relation to security issues, cross-border raids, and also other issues which are further related to terrorism, etc., on the eastern side. We had, because from the central government system, it was very difficult to reach out to some of these very far lands because of infrastructure constraints and others. So there wasn't very good service delivery in those particular areas. And then there was also the issue of legitimacy. And really all this was because the presence of national government was not really being felt. I remember I started working in the Turkana area in 1990, and whenever I used to leave, they would tell me, hey, when you go back to Kenya, say hello. So, that has, the county government system, the decentralization has really brought governance closer to the people. And it offers then a lot of opportunities, including accountability, public participation, which is also embedded within the Constitution, democratic governance, a continuance of that and bringing it down to devolved units, delivering the human right to water, as has been mentioned by our minister, implementing the post-2015 development agenda. And we expect that we are going to get much better results with the SDGs than we did with the MDGs, again, because of that kind of proximity that we see. We also hope that we are going to see changes in behavior from our water users because they are interacting much more closely with the institutions in those regions. And we look forward also to positive development outcomes. We've talked again about the droughts and floods. How do we reduce the vulnerabilities to climate shocks? We heard earlier this morning that, okay, we really shouldn't be talking only about the extremes, but we do see that the extremes have a major impact on the GDPs of the country, and they can be major setbacks to the country's development trajectories. But we also do have issues which relate to changes that are happening between the extremes, and we are seeing a lot of changes in the onset of rains, in the succession of rains, and in the distribution of rainfall, and also in the intensity of rainfall. So all of these factors will have some major impacts on the water resource, whether or not you're dealing with extremes or looking at variations and variability between those extremes. We also have a paradox. We cannot really rely much on the climate records, on the climate models so far, because as they project more rainfall for the Eastern Africa region, what we are seeing is actually drying out. So these are some of the issues that underlie water security-related issues that are driven by climate shocks. The mobile ecosystems, as I've already alluded to, if we look at Africa as a whole, by 2006, we had more Africans with a mobile phone than with access to a piped water connection. And of course, that margin has even grown. In Kenya alone, as of last year, 78 of every 100 inhabitants had subscribed to a mobile phone. So the penetration is really deep. Okay, barring, of course, the issue that maybe some people have multiple numbers of phones, that penetration is quite key. But we also see that access to piped water on premises has actually decreased as a consequence maybe of dilution through population growth, and also as a consequence of maybe lack of maintenance of existing systems. So mobile technologies have started to be used innovatively in water services delivery. If we look at the case of the hand pumps in Cuso and also in the coast, which is being led by Rob Hope, we are able to, by putting in a mobile transmission system into the hand pumps, we can get quite a lot of data which otherwise would not be available to us. We would be able to tell how much water is being pumped out of the shallow groundwater systems to serve a certain number of inhabitants within a particular region. We can tell how much effort is being exerted. We can look at how that usage relates to the changing seasons. And we can also use that information to actually learn more about those aquifers. For example, what is the depth? So it offers a lot of scope to come up with innovative ways for addressing these issues that relate to water security. Poverty, we've mentioned, is a key aspect that really needs to be tackled within the region. And we have the issue of how do we understand the real nature of poverty? If we look at the literature on the poverty and the metrics that are used, there are a diverse number of metrics which are used to quantify poverty. But these metrics are not really well related to water security issues. And we need to be able to step into that debate and find out what kind of metrics can we actually develop that will enable us to track water security-related issues within the context of that poverty environment. So there is a lot to be done in order to make sure that people like these are able to access the water resource. Kenya itself, of course, is very aware of this problem of the inequalities that we see in the nation. And we recognize that it's not only income metrics that will really explain to us what is happening, but we need to look at the wider aspects of human welfare and to address the issues from that point of view. We are now beginning to pay more attention to multidimensional welfare assessments, and also as a consequence of embedding the issue in our constitution and also devolving those issues to the county governments, we are taking into account the views of individuals and in particular also the vulnerable groups. So we have an opportunity to generate new and much more informative data sets in that regard. We see, for example, some things don't seem to change. Since 1964 until today, we see that the income inequality, as measured by the Gini coefficient, has remained high within the country. But we are saying that these issues can now be addressed much more effectively, given the new landscape that has opened up for the country. It is obvious now that poverty outcomes and water-related risks reflect also interactions of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. And we intend really to capture these elements as we carry out our work in the observatories, which I will outline a little bit later. We note, for example, that our children in the arid and semi-arid parts of the country, which are mostly the northern and the far eastern sides, have the highest child deprivation scores. And so they're really, really vulnerable. If we look at the figure on the upper right-hand side and look at the stunting, there's still a large number of stunted children in those particular regions. And some of that is related really to the water resource. Poor quality results in them suffering from diarrheal diseases and other diseases. Lack of sufficient water means that they're not able to get access to a diversity of foods and food crops that may be grown in certain parts of those arid regions. So we have a lot of issues that we need to tackle, and we need to look at them in a much more holistic manner in order to address that. In the lower half, as you can see, we have at the bottom on the x-axis, we have the counties, some of the county names there, and you can see that where we actually have the highest poverty rates, those are the counties where we have that are in the arid and semi-arid lands. Women, children, and elderly persons, of course, tend to be disproportionately affected by water stress. I've mentioned the issue of water-related hazards, including waterborne diseases. They have different impacts even within our community, affecting in a disproportionate way children and perhaps pregnant women and perhaps those that are infirm or ill. So our water policies and management systems are actually now being developed again under the new system of devolution to become more sensitive and inclusive of these particular groups. I've already mentioned some of the issues here relating to poverty, but it would be interesting here to mention the fact that an increase in urban poverty reflects the rural to urban migration that we see within the country. But what is happening today, again, partly as a consequence of the devolution and decentralization, is that the towns in these fragile lands are actually now growing explosively and much, much faster than the growth in the larger cities like Nairobi and Mombasa. We also have what is called the National Integrated Housing Surveys. These have been done. The first one was done in 2005. We have another one which is, I think, in the process of being undertaken right now. But these particular data sets don't really give us much to go with because they are separated they're quite separated in terms of the temporal span, and it is difficult to compare 2 points. Now I'll go very quickly, as I think I've got a minute or so. This young boy is asking a couple of questions when he's getting this water and putting it in the jerry can. He's asking himself now, will I always get this water when I come to get it? Is it always going to be clean? Is it always going to be available? Is it going to be enough for me and my family when I become a man? Is it going to be enough for me when I become an old man? Is it going to be enough for my community? Are we going to be fighting over this resource? Is it going to be contaminated by the planned industrial growth and activities Is land degradation going to affect this resource? What about the natural contaminants? Are we going to be able to develop technologies to remove the fluoride from the water, etc.? Many questions and many issues related to water security that we need to answer. 2 minutes. I've got 2 last slides to present here. We have, as one of our observatories, Lodwar, focusing on the town. It has much higher poverty rates than other arid and semi-arid land areas. It is highly dependent on groundwater. There are no real surface water resources that can actually be used. There are high levels of uncertainty in relation to how much water is actually available and the quality of that water. Although we had, if many of you 2 years ago might have heard of the RTI work, which indicated that there are billions of cubic meters of potentially good resources in that area. We also have large economic changes forecast for that particular region. We have what is referred to as the Lobster Project, which is a major infrastructure project that once is linking Kenya with Ethiopia and Sudan through roads and pipelines and electricity lines, and we have plans to even build in new resort cities, and we expect a lot to be happening in relation to that. And Lodwar lies in the center of that activity. So it allows us to have long-term observations on climate change, to look at the issues of decentralized impacts, to look at the issues of poverty and address inequality issues, and in relation also to the vulnerable populations. In Kitui, we have the opportunity to explore how we can actually help to evolve and develop institutions that can address the issue of water security at scale. We have the Kitui County government supporting the installation of mobile-enabled transmitters to monitor rural hand pumps in that area. And we are able to now begin generating data sets that will enable us to better manage those particular water resources and to build the capacity to enable us to address water security issues in that context. I think the figure down here really shows something interesting also about behavior, in the sense that when there's rainfall, then people abandon this very nice and clean water resource to go and use other water sources, surface water that's flowing in the rivers, and maybe water harvested from the roofs. And this, in a sense, indicates to us some of the cultural issues or behavioral issues that need to be addressed. And it's not only just about, science and, the scientific metrics, science metrics or social science metrics, but also anthropological issues and ethnological issues come into play. I guess I'll stop there, and we'll take questions in the afternoon. Thank you.